Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're going on a journey back to 14th century England with a figure who was as powerful as he was, well, controversial. I'm talking about John of Gaunt.
John of Gaunt. Oh, yeah. Fascinating figure.
Now, imagine inheriting a third of your country's land. That's the kind of wealth and power that John of Gaunt enjoyed. He was the son of King Edward III. But as we'll soon find out, that kind of power, uh, it doesn't come cheap.
You got that right. His life was a whirlwind of ambition, political maneuvering, you name it. He even had a close call with a full-blown rebellion. To really grasp John of Gaunt, though, we need to understand the era he lived in. An era consumed by war, the Hundred Years' War with France.
The Hundred Years' War, I mean, that conflict just screams drama, right? Knights, battles, sieges, all that.
Yeah, there's definitely no shortage of drama there. But it's important to remember that for the people living through it, the Hundred Years' War was brutal. It just sucked the life out of England. But it also stirred up a sense of national pride, too.
So where does John of Gaunt fit into this warlike world? Was he out there on the front lines, leading the charge?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, his father was Edward III, a warrior king, and his brother, Edward the Black Prince, the legendary military leader. But John of Gaunt, he wasn't cut from the same cloth. He was more at home in the halls of diplomacy than on any battlefield.
So the brains behind the brawn, eh?
You could say that. He had a knack for diplomacy, for negotiating treaties, making alliances, playing the game of politics. In fact, his diplomatic skills were so sharp, get this, he was actually considered a potential heir to the Scottish throne.
Whoa, hold on. An English duke ruling Scotland. That would have been a huge twist in history.
No kidding. But his ambitions, they were actually fixed on a different prize. The throne of Castile in modern-day Spain.
Ah, Castile. His first wife, Constance of Castile. So he believed he had a legitimate claim through her.
That's it. And this ambition, it basically fueled his entire life.
And speaking of ambition, let's talk about his nephew, Richard II. The guy became king at just 12 years old. That's pretty young to be running a country, to say the least. How did John of Gaunt, a powerful, experienced figure, deal with that?
It's a good question. John of Gaunt became Richard's advisor, a role packed with influence, sure, but also a whole lot of suspicion. Richard, as he got older, became more and more wary of his uncle's power.
So it's like a power struggle brewing. And then, of course, you have the infamous Peasants' Revolt of 1381. What led to such a widespread uprising?
Well, to understand that revolt, we need to talk about these crippling poll taxes they levied during Richard II's reign. Imagine a flat tax on every adult, regardless of income.
Hold on. So a wealthy nobleman paid the same tax as a poor farmer? No wonder people were outraged.
You got it. And to make things worse, these taxes were being used to fund the war with France, a war that wasn't exactly going England's way at that point.
The perfect recipe for a rebellion. And who did the people see as the face of this oppressive system?
John of Gaunt. He was the embodiment of the ruling elite, the wealthy few benefiting from the suffering of the masses.
And that leads us to a turning point in his life. The attack on his Savoy palace. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism, was it?
Not even close. The Savoy Palace symbolized John of Gaunt's wealth and power. It was a magnificent estate right on the banks of the Thames in London. Imagine a sprawling medieval mansion filled with priceless treasures, you name it.
Sounds like something out of a history book. So what happened? Did the rebels just storm the place and take everything?
Pretty much, yeah. They smashed through the palace defenses, tore down tapestries, looted valuables. It was pure chaos, fueled by anger.
Did they torch it?
Well, that cal later. It's interesting, actually. The rebels were pretty disciplined in their destruction. Anyone caught stealing for personal gain was punished. Their goal was to make a statement, to dismantle what John of Gaunt represented.
So it wasn't just mindless destruction. It was targeted, symbolic.
Exactly, and they were thorough. They even built a bonfire in the Great Hall, tossing his luxurious stuff onto the flames. But there was a twist.
A twist. Okay, now I'm intrigued. What happened? Did John of Gaunt try to fight them off?
He wasn't even there. John of Gaunt was away on a diplomatic mission to Scotland. Can you imagine getting news that your palace was under attack?
Oh, man. That must have been a shock.
Totally. But the real twist, get this, is that the rebels accidentally set off some gunpowder barrels hidden inside the palace.
Gunpowder. That's adding fuel to the fire, literally.
Right. The explosion caused part of the palace to collapse, and it trapped some of the rebels who were, shall we say, enjoying John of Gaunt's wine cellar a little too much.
Wow. What a turn of events. So the Savoy Palace was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And what about the rebels?
The palace took a serious beating, that's for sure. As for the rebels, many were caught and some faced pretty harsh punishments. The revolt was put down, but it sent shockwaves through England, leaving John of Gaunt in a very, very shaky position. So yeah, we left John of Gaunt in a tough spot, right? His palace was trashed, England was in chaos, and he was stuck in Scotland, depending on their mercy.
Yeah, it really shows you how quickly power can shift. One minute you have it, all the wealth, the land, the influence, and the next, it could all vanish.
Right. But John of Gaunt, well, he was a survivor. Get this. The Scots, despite their rivalry with England, actually protected him. They even gave him an army to help put down the rebellion.
Wow, hold on. You'd think they'd take advantage of England's weakness, not lend a hand. What was in it for them?
Well, it was all about strategy and politics. The Scots saw a chance to gain leverage with the English crown. By helping John of Gaunt, they hoped to score some favors down the line.
It's amazing how, even in the middle of chaos, diplomacy never really stops.
Exactly. And for John of Gaunt, this whole experience seemed to change him. He came out of the Peasants' Revolt a different man.
Really? In what way? Did he become more careful, more aware of how fragile his power was?
His priorities shifted. He turned to religion big time. He gave huge sums to churches and monasteries, did acts of penance, and here's the big one. He ended his relationship with Catherine Swynford.
Catherine Swynford, the mother of his children. That's a big decision. I mean, she wasn't just some fling. From what I've read, they were deeply in love.
It was complicated. They were devoted to each other, but their relationship was a no-no in the eyes of society. She was a commoner, so their children, while acknowledged by John of Gaunt, were considered illegitimate.
So was he trying to protect her reputation by ending it? Or maybe appease the church?
Probably a bit of both. The Peasants' Revolt really shook up society. There was this sudden emphasis on being pious and morally upright. John of Gaunt probably felt pressure to fall in line.
But he didn't completely abandon Catherine, right? There's something about a shrine dedicated to St. Catherine. Is there a connection?
You're picking up on the details. Good. Yeah, John of Gaunt commissioned this beautiful shrine to St. Catherine at Lincoln Cathedral, one of his many properties. It's widely thought to be a tribute to Catherine Swynford.
That's actually really sweet. Shows his love for her endured. Kind of a testament to the power of love, even when things get tough.
It is, but let's not forget the other thing driving John of Gaunt, his ambition to be King of Castile. The Peasants' Revolt might have shaken him, but it didn't squash his desire for power.
So Spain was his next target. Tell me about these Castilian campaigns. Did they work out?
Not so much. John of Gaunt poured a ton of resources into these campaigns, but they were failures. The current king resisted fiercely, and his troops just couldn't handle the terrain and climate in Spain.
It seems like ambition often overreached reality with him. But these failed campaigns, they must have messed with his relationship with Richard II. No king would be happy with his powerful uncle wasting resources on overseas adventures.
You're right. Their relationship was already strained, and these campaigns just made things worse. Richard saw his uncle as a potential threat, someone who might try to grab the throne.
And to be honest, Richard II wasn't exactly known for making good decisions. He could be impulsive, even a bit of a tyrant sometimes. It makes sense he'd be suspicious of John of Gaunt.
Their relationship was like a ticking time bomb, and in a way, it did explode. Remember John of Gaunt's son, Henry of Bolingbroke? Well, Richard II ended up exiling him for quarreling with another nobleman.
Exile. That's harsh.
It was. And John of Gaunt was furious. He begged Richard to change his mind, but the king refused. This just deepened the rift between them, setting the stage for a major clash.
So his son is exiled. His relationship with Richard II is shattered. His dreams of being King of Castile are crushed. It sounds like a string of defeats. How did he cope with all this?
He focused on what he could control. John of Gaunt was a survivor. He might have lost battles, but he wouldn't give up on the things that truly mattered.
And what were those?
His family and legacy. Despite their problems, John of Gaunt loved his nephew, and he was really worried about the direction Richard II was taking England. And of course, there was Catherine Swynford and their children to consider.
So, what next? Did John of Gaunt challenge Richard II, try to bring his son back?
That's where things get even juicier. But to get into that, we'll have to move on to part 3 of our deep dive.
So, last we heard, John of Gaunt was all about family and legacy. What happened next?
Well, time kept ticking, like it always does. John of Gaunt's health started going downhill. And, this is the late 1300s. Medicine wasn't exactly advanced.
Right, no miracle cures back then. So his health is failing, his relationship with Richard II is still a mess. What did he do? try to patch things up with the king.
He did something even bigger. In 1396, a few years before he died, he married Catherine Swynford.
He married her. After all that societal pressure, the whispers, he made it official. That's incredible. It says a lot about their love, his commitment to her and their kids.
Exactly. It was a bold move, really bucking the trends. And by marrying her, their children, the Beauforts, became legitimate heirs.
And that decision, if I remember correctly, had huge consequences down the line, right? Something about the Wars of the Roses and the Tudors.
You got it. It's amazing how personal choices can ripple through history. So, through John of Gaunt's legitimized Beaufort line, one of his descendants, Margaret Beaufort, had a son, Henry Tudor.
Henry Tudor. The future Henry VII, the first Tudor king. Wow, I didn't see that coming. So John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, the guy who survived rebellions and a palace burning, is the ancestor of some of the biggest names in English history. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, the whole Tudor crew.
It's a family tree full of drama and power struggles, and it all goes back to John of Gaunt's decision to defy expectations and marry the woman he loved.
What a legacy. Speaking of legacy, we've talked about John of Gaunt's ambition, his political skills, his personal life. But how should we remember him? Hero or villain?
That's a question historians are still debating. He was complicated, full of contradictions. A skilled diplomat, a clever politician, a loving father. But also ambitious, sometimes ruthless, and willing to use his power to get what he wanted.
He did live in a crazy time, though. Wars, plagues, social unrest everywhere. It's hard to judge him by today's standards.
Absolutely. We have to think about the world he lived in. The 14th century was a different place, power was often inherited, and personal ambition and national interest were all tangled up.
So maybe it's best to see him as a man of his time. Flawed, for sure, but also capable of love, loyalty, and sharp political thinking. Someone whose actions, good and bad, shaped English history.
I think that's a fair way to look at it. And we can't forget about the Savoy Palace, what it represented. Its destruction during the Peasants' Revolt showed just how much people hated the extravagance and inequality that John of Gaunt stood for. But then it was turned into a charitable hospital, which shows a different kind of legacy, one of compassion and caring for the less fortunate.
There's something poetic about that. The place that was attacked as a symbol of oppression becomes a place of healing.
Right. It reminds us that history is full of surprises. Even from destruction, something good can grow.
Well said. John of Gaunt's story has been quite a ride. Ambition, love, rebellion, and a lasting legacy that still affects how we see English history.
It's a story that shows us the past is never really over. It lives on in the stories we tell, the places we live in, the choices we make.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the life of John of Gaunt. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next fascinating exploration.